And then on top of that, we've been conditioned to believe that power is a bad thing, like with quotes like power corrupts. And what good-hearted being wants to be corrupted? But what they forgot to tell us, or maybe didn't tell us intentionally about that quote, was that Lord Acton was referring specifically to political power, not personal power, which is what, of course, what we're talking about here. And so when you add to that mix the fact that we have also been conditioned to make the emotions weakness, we're afraid of our emotions, and I mean, so much to say about that too, about all the faulty assumptions about making the assumptions weakness. But what happens when we put all those things together is that we end up giving away our power, our innate, inherent power that no one can give to us. No one can take away. We are the only ones who can give it away. And what's tragic, Shilpa, as you know, is the reasons for which we give it away. We end up, how many times have we ended up saying yes when inside?
Namaste, beautiful souls. I'm Shilpa, and you're tuned into the Omni Mindfulness podcast, a sanctuary for spiritual entrepreneurs. As a holistic mindfulness coach and social marketing strategist, I'm here to guide you on a transformative journey. On this show, we explore captivating stories and provide practical tools that deepen your connection with your authentic self. Through the personal and professional narratives of remarkable individuals, we expand our consciousness and ignite the spark of possibility. Each season, I curate content that empowers you to create a holistic lifestyle encompassing spirituality, mindfulness, energy awareness, and mindset. Join me as we engage in conversations with experts in their respective fields and share solo casts from yours truly, all aimed at supporting you and relaxing, revitalizing, resetting your body, mind, and spirit. I'm your host and the visionary behind Omni Mindfulness. So what if just one story had the power to shift the trajectory of your life? What if you could become an instrument in helping others realize their true selves? And what if your soul's higher purpose lies in experiencing the joy of Omni Mindfulness? Remember, it's never too late to rewrite your story. And my next guest on the topic of elevating your soulful message is Christian de la Huerta. With 30 years of experience, Christian is a sought-after spiritual teacher, personal transformation coach, and leading voice in the breathwork community. He has traveled the world offering inspiring and transformational retreats, combining psychological and spiritual teachings with lasting and life-changing effects. An award-winning, critically acclaimed author, he has spoken at numerous universities and conferences and on the TEDx stage. His new book, Awakening the Soul of Power, was described by multiple Grammy Award winner Gloria Estefan as a balm for the soul of anyone searching for truth and answers to life's difficult questions. And now, without further ado, here is my conversation with Christian. Welcome, Christian. Thank you for being here.
Hey, Shilpa. I'm so happy to be here with you. Thanks for having me.
Yes. Well, before I hit record, I mentioned that we had a connection not too long ago via LinkedIn, and the timing may not have been right, but now I have you on my podcast, and I'm so honored.
Thank you. That means a lot, and I'm honored as well to be here.
Wonderful. I believe that starting with the storyline is always very influential in people's the human mind loves stories, and we are connected with one another through our stories. So perhaps we could back out of the current moment, the big picture, arriving to where you are in the spiritual phase in your life, or maybe you've always been very spiritual. Maybe you can walk us through that journey.
I think I've always had a sense of mission and a desire to help other humans, to make a difference in real human lives. And depending on where I was in my different stages in my life, I translated that in different ways. So I was raised in a very Catholic family. I'm one of 9 kids. And initially, I thought I wanted to be a priest. I thought I went to a Jesuit high school, and I thought I wanted to be a Jesuit. Almost became one. Then my dad was a psychiatrist, and I got a degree in psychology. I was on a track to get a PhD, so I translated it that way until I eventually, realized, discovered that religion didn't have enough room for me. Um, so I started searching elsewhere. I looked eastward, and these days, I'm fed by many different spiritual traditions. I don't belong to any particular one, but that desire to serve, to make a difference, it's still there. It's just gotten manifested and expressed in a different way.
I feel like many of the people I've spoken to on my podcast have had a similar calling, inner voice. I too have always felt like there was a deeper desire to serve on a grander, more humanity level. And when I say grand, it's not about the ego, it's just going beyond the material world. Now, perhaps now bring us to where you are now in your journey. And we were just sharing or talking about your book, Awakening the Soul of Power. And I just love that title. And I know the word soulful is really pivotal for you. So maybe you can share more about the book and the concept of soulful.
Yeah, I love that. I think most of us struggle with issues around power. Just the word itself can generate, conflicted, ambivalent feelings toward that. I think part of us wants that, and yet part of us is afraid of it. And I think what we fear is that if we really stepped into all of our power, that we might cause harm, or that we might end up rejected and alone, and that other people wouldn't be able to handle it. I think we also fear that we might abuse it, and wonder how many abuses of power have each one of us experienced on just on any given day. Um, and then on top of that, we've been conditioned to believe that power is a bad thing, like with quotes like "power corrupts," and "what good-hearted being wants to be corrupted." But what they forgot to tell us, or maybe didn't tell us intentionally about that quote, was that Lord Acton was referring specifically to political power, not personal power, which is of course, what we're talking about here. And so when you add to that mix the fact that we have also been conditioned to make the emotions weakness, we're afraid of our emotions, and I mean, so much to say about that too, about all the faulty assumptions about making the assumptions weakness. But what happens when we put all those things together is that we end up giving away our power, our innate, inherent power that no one can give to us. No one can take away. We are the only ones who can give it away. And what's tragic, Shilpa, as you know, is the reasons for which we give it away. How many times have we ended up saying yes when inside it's a no? Like inside, we don't really want to do that. It doesn't work for us. But in order to, we settle for that illusion of peace, for a false sense of security or false sense of acceptance. We settle for crumbs of pseudo love. And it's not a good strategy, because that ends up turning into resentment inside each one of us. So in the book is about how to step into power, how to reclaim our power in a way that is a match for who we are, in a way that doesn't require that we push anybody down, step on them in order for us to feel powerful, in a way that's not about hierarchy or control or fear or force or domination. How do we do that in a different way?
Um, I'm curious, when you mentioned that we say yes when we don't really mean it at times, I feel like I've observed that as a behavior on many levels. It could be on a macro level or cultural level. Now, as a Indian woman raised in a fairly orthodox culture, I saw multiple conditions or situations where people would say yes to, say, arranged marriage, yes to a lot of things that it may not be resonating with their true nature or desires. And
Exactly.
I see that outside of other cultures as well.
I think it's the human condition. It's the human condition. We're we're conditioned to acquiesce, to not question authority, and it's passed on from generation to generation to generation, um, and like I was saying before, it's not a good strategy because it doesn't really work. Every time that we override our true feelings, we're like betraying ourselves, and that turns into resentment both towards self and toward the systems or the individuals for which for with whom we are settling. um, so it doesn't work for anybody. And there is a way, there is a way to step into our powers. Like I know from personal experience, I know self-doubt intimately. I know self-hatred even. My entire adolescence was one long depression with suicidal fantasies. And yet, flash forward to today, like no matter what happens in my life, no matter the circumstances, whether a relationship works out or it doesn't, whether a project succeeds or it fails, in quotes, never, ever, ever, ever do I question my sense of self. So I know that stuff can be, no matter where it comes from, no matter how it was conditioned, no matter the reasons for which we're overriding and selling out on our power, and overriding our preferences, our desires, our dreams, like all that stuff can get healed. And we can figure out a way to step into our authentic self and learn how to communicate that in a way that works.
And that certainly can be challenging for so many because, on one hand, by going against the grain, which I've been known to do, there's a lot of torment that I used to do to myself and may have continued doing over the years. Like, why can't I just fall in line? Why can't I just be like everybody else? And I've even had people tell me, or one particular person I admired, that, well, if you just did and fill in the blank, um, things would be easier, right? And
Yes.
yet you and I are aware that what you mentioned, something to the effect of the soul, and understanding the alignment, that often that what I call the wobble, that dissonance we feel, is because we're not in alignment, but we're so busy as humans to kind of survive as a tribe. And if the tribe is going west, everybody wants to go in the direction of that without challenging the status quo.
That's it. That's it. Without even questioning why we do the things we do.
Yes.
And so yeah, it's not a good strategy. And you're right, it's not easy. The path that you and I have chosen, and I think that the path that anybody listening to this conversation has also chosen, is not the easy one. It's the road less traveled, is the heroic path. And infinitely rewarding. Like nobody promised us that any of this was going to be easy. And if it was easy, then so what, right? It would lose the challenge. Anybody could do it. And so I think the path of conscious awakening, remember, of spiritual transformation, of fulfilling our unique human potential. Yes, it's hard, and yes, to me, there's no other way. Like there is nothing else that's going to fulfill us. Like I think anybody who's watching this and has stuck with it this far knows that there isn't anyone out there who's going to make us happy, and it's not their job to. Like how unfair to put that responsibility on other human being. You are going to make me happy. Yikes. If that's how we're approaching relationships, hang it up. Because there isn't anyone out there, and it's only our job to make us happy. And we also know, like, there isn't enough money, enough possessions, enough worldly power to fulfill us. Like, how many more examples do we need of people who have, whether they're celebrities or political leaders, who have all the power all the money you could ever want, and they're miserable and they're thin skinned, and the slightest tweet sends them into a tailspin. And it's that part of us, if that's what we're basing our happiness on or our fulfillment, it's insatiable. There's not enough of anything to make us to make us feel fulfilled. To me, the only thing that fulfills us is giving expression to that unique human potential that resides inside each one of us.
Hey there, sweet souls. If you're finding value in this episode, I'd be so honored if you could take a moment to share it with that one person you know it would truly serve. And here's some exciting news. My podcast, Omni Mindfulness, was recently ranked in the top 10% globally by Listen Score. It's all thanks to your amazing support and listenership. So let's spread the love and wisdom together. Thank you for being a part of my mindfulness community. Sending you lots of love and light. This is Shilpa.
Because there isn't anyone else in this universe or any other universe for that matter who has the same genetics, the same set of experiences that make each one of us unique. And if we won't give expression to that, ain't nobody else going to do it.
And so many things you just articulated resonate with me on such a deep level. One of them is you and I had talked about Yogananda, and one of the challenges, yet boons, is that you are stepping into when you live a very spiritual life, is that the challenges are the same, probably, just as like anyone else. However, I think, at least for myself, I challenge myself. I put a lot of accountability on myself. And I remember recently expressing to someone that it's not easy. I feel like, what can I show for this very esoteric, subtle stuff that I do? Because it's not like the material world where you can say, oh, I live in this bigger house or fancier car.
Yeah.
Now,
Yeah. How do you measure inner peace? How do you measure happiness?
yes.
I mean, we can definitely feel the difference, from being unhappy to being happy. But once you make that shift, it's harder to measure progress, or it's harder to measure degrees of. Um, and you're right. That's part of the reason that it makes it a more difficult path. We're talking about non tangibles. Um, it's just a different path, with different. And I would have it no other way, as I'm sure you wouldn't either, because once we step out of the consensus way of looking at life, the consensus reality, that to me is so limiting and so limited, um, then it's almost like you're stepping into a different world with different physics, different reality, um, and yes, there's probably less people at this point in our collective evolution to hang around with at those levels, but it's not a matter of quantity. It's a matter of depth and quality, and the depth of connection that's available, both starting with connection to ourselves, which is the starting point for it all, and which is what everything else depends on. It's just an extraordinary journey, and an extraordinary way of living, incredibly fulfilling.
Absolutely. And it does allow us to experience things that perhaps, like I mentioned earlier, it's subtle, but it allows us to truly connect with a a portion of us that often is hidden in the world that we live in. There's a world of lights and darkness and illusions. And when you talk about something esoteric like your soul or soulful, what does that mean? But that goes back to why I created this particular topic this month, elevating your soulful message. And I feel like those who have stepped into that role, like you have, it's you've taken on a mission. Maybe it was a contract before you arrived, but even your book and the work you do, maybe go deeper into that work, because I know that, myself included, I'd like to learn more.
Yeah, and here's how I hold like the bigger picture. Like, sometimes when I look at the world and any one of the problems that we're facing is just completely overwhelming. Like, what can I possibly do as an individual about global climate change? So it's easy to give up. It's easy to just numb out and forget about it and want to distract ourselves with in all the infinite ways that we're so good at distracting ourselves and avoiding feeling or thinking. But those are paths that just don't have a good ending, right? They're had you get stuck in those ways of being. So once we choose to live consciously, and I don't want to get in this, like there's philosophical discussions about what's the difference between the soul and the spirit and the psyche. To me, it doesn't matter that much. To me, when I think about the world that we live in, and I think about how do we dig ourselves out of this hole that we have dug ourselves collectively into, the only way that I see is it's a spiritual revolution, something that's going to shift, like a leap in consciousness, a leap in the way that we see ourselves and we see each other, and that we see this world, this planet that we're living on. And paraphrasing Einstein, you can't solve a problem from the same level of consciousness in which it was created. So for me, that's what I mean by a soulful shift, a shift in the way that we see ourselves. And there's a whole other hour-long discussion that we could have just about what the ego is. We don't have time to get into that, but here's a simple metaphor. If you put a baseball or football in the center of a stadium, that's what the ego is. And the ego is that sense of self, that illusion of separate identity. This is Christian over here, that's Shilpa over there. Both a very helpful illusion and the source of all our suffering. But so the baseball is the ego, it's that sense of self. Who we are is actually the stadium. And we've allowed this tiny, 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 infinitesimal part of us to think that it is all who we are and to make choices like important, significant, consequential choices about our lives, what we do with them, about our relationships from its very small, limited, and always fear based perspective. So, part of this change that you and I are pointing to is shifting the identification from the baseball to the stadium. And that's the part of us that has a different physics and a different way of living, in which we like even the language to describe. So we use words like magic or miracles. But you know, I think it's just because we lack the languaging to describe this other reality when we come from that bigger part of us. Call it the soul, call it the higher self, call it the spiritual part of us, call it whatever you wish. It's the part of it that goes beyond this limited physical carbon-based mini spaceship that allows us to be here for a number of years.
One of the things that I've been really also focusing on beyond just this concept of ego is consciousness, subconsciousness, and super consciousness. What does that mean? And really, at the end of the day, if I want to be geeked out about it like Einstein, it's energy. And if each of us is a entity as an energy, then of course energy affects another energy.
Yes.
Now,
Yes, and we know from physics, right, that everything is energy. What used to be spiritual teaching that everything is energy, now we know from quantum physics that guess what, everything is energy. So even what feels solid, like this body of ours, or the chair that I'm sitting on, even though it might feel solid, it's just energy, it's just vibration. Um, and so you're right. When we start realizing, that and the transient nature of that, it shifts how we see ourselves, and it makes relating, it takes it to a whole other level, like connecting to another energy being. It's like now we're talking.
and personally, what I have really been zeroing in on for my piece is vibration and where is my vibratory state? Where are my thoughts? And the more I zero in on that through my daily meditation, which is morning and night, there's this level of equanimity that occurs. And I truly believe it's because you were saying earlier about the problem The problem cannot be solved where you're at, because it's a different vibration level. So when we start thinking of our thoughts and understanding where they're triggering a manifestation, then we can then step back and say, how do I want to consciously vibrate? Does that
Exactly. Exactly. And then it takes everything out of the realm of dogma, right? So it's not because you should eat or not eat this or do or not do that, right? It's just because how will placing ourselves in that situation or placing whatever that substance is into our bodies, how will that affect our vibration? And that we want to continue doing stuff that's going to lower that and make more dense that vibrational frequency, or do we choose to vibrate at a higher frequency?
Absolutely, absolutely. And then you mentioned something that actually is true to my heart. April is my birthday month, and I'm doing a whole podcast on designing our life consciously. And one of the things that resonates with me deeply is how we affect our environment, and the topic of sustainability. And like when you were just mentioning what we put into our body. So maybe I'm just out of curiosity, can you speak to that topic of um, what you believe is our role? What can we do consciously as humans when we feel a level of, and I can speak for myself, frustration when we feel like our environment, our earth is going to need more love?
Yeah. Uh, I mean, and it's heartbreaking when we see what's happening to our planet and the way that we're treating our planet. It's really tough. Um, and the way that we treat each other, like it's really challenging. And I think the way that I think of it, like the big picture of what's happening, it's like we're actually witnessing the end of the patriarchal phase, which has had and this is not to put down men, is not to put down the masculine at all. It's just that we've been running very off balance, very off kilter between the masculine and the feminine energies. So we could say that over the last, several thousand years, we've had this very wham, wham, bam, thank you, ma'am relationship to the earth. We take and we take and we take without even regard to our own survival on this little pebble that allows us to be here. And so what I see is shifting is it's to a more, yes, conscious, more it's becoming more present to who we actually are, so that the way that we treat ourselves, the way that we treat each other, the way that we treat our planet is really at the function of that vibrational frequency that you and I were talking about before. And it's like, even I can even take it out of the morality issue. um, but one of the things that I love and appreciate, and I love and appreciate many things about different religions, but one of the things that I love about the Hindu religions, the concept of namaste, which I know that I'm simplifying here, but if we approach each other with that concept of the sacred in me sees and honors and bows to that in you, including the planet, how can we treat each other that way? How can we rape, or how can we steal from each other or kill each other or invade each other's countries if we're coming from that perspective? And so, yeah, I think it all goes back to presence and consciousness and vibration.
And one thing that you just mentioned, I think you can potentially relate to a couple of concepts around respect. One is when you say namaste, it's my soul's light bows to your soul's light. But I believe that as all sentient beings, because we have light and love in each of us, that goes for not only soul to human, but human to all entities, all sentient entities, including the earth. And that
Yes.
goes back to the language and words we use. So you're probably aware of non-violent language, conscious language. So how we address one another. And like in the Indian language, I believe Spanish, other languages, you when you refer to someone, there's a different way to say, like in Gujarati or Indian, there's a certain word that we use, so that if somebody just enters the room, we're not just saying, hey, you, it's somebody with a little elevated title.
Yes.
know if you speak any other languages, but there's a word for it in Spanish as well.
Yes, Spanish is my first language. Yes.
What is it? Is it usted or
Usted
yeah?
is like more kind of the formal you, what you would say to somebody you just met or an elder.
Yeah.
And then if you and I are just friends or it's tú.
Yeah, and it's almost like literally in the dialect I speak, it's tu. But then if it's somebody respectful, and we say G at the end, you've probably heard this, like
Yeah, Guruji.
Guruji, right? And
Mm-hmm.
it feels sweet. It feels sweet when it even comes off of your tongue. It's a sign of respect. It's also sweetness, like a little child speaking to you. So yeah, but those are all vibrations, the words, the thoughts, the actions then. So what can we collectively do at this point to elevate this message, aside from like what I'm trying with the podcast and helping those that are vibrating on this level like you are to elevate their message? But what if there's someone who's just new on the path of spirituality? They're like, what is this elevate stuff?
It's, we can frame it in a different way. We can frame it like if you want to be happy, if you want to express yourself fully, if you want to step into your power, um, it all begins with self-awareness. Right? We can't do anything about what we can't see. So that's always the first step. And beginning to understand the mind, the ego mind that we were alluding to before, beginning to observe ourselves going through life so that we begin to see the triggers, so that we can begin to see the patterns of behavior and begin to realize that at the core of every one of those patterns, at the core of every one of those arguments, every one of those relationships that causes us grift is one thing that's right here. So at some point, we've got to move into that place of taking on responsibility for our lives. And this doesn't excuse or rationalize what happened or try to spiritual bypass and ignore the past or ignore the realities of a system that is set up unfairly. It doesn't have anything to do with that. But if we want to be free, if we want to step into our own power, if we want to be happy and expressed and fulfilled, we've got to start from that place of realizing that it's got to start here. And we've got to understand why we do the things we do so that we can choose otherwise and let ourselves out of our self-made prison of fear and lack and victimization and disempowerment and reactivity, and projection, and all the things that it's part of the human condition, that's part of the effects of the human ego mind, but realizing that we are so much more than that, and that we always have a choice. Like we will never have a choice over what happens in life, right? Life is going to continue throwing curveballs our way. Stuff is going to happen in our personal lives and global pandemics that nobody saw coming, right? We can't do anything about that, but we can always do something about how we show up in response. And even that slight reframe, it's a slight reframe, but it's an all powerful reframe because it changes everything. It pops us out of disempowerment and realizing, okay, right, that sucked. I wish that hadn't happened, or I wish the system would work differently. Oh, well. And what am I going to do in response to that? And so it's a very empowering way to approach life.
That's incredibly well wrapped up. There's just the concept of empowerment and power. It can be elusive and it can have a very different connotation depending on one's approach. But like you were saying, the duality of life will often continue. And how do you become more empowered by responding versus reacting?
That's it. That's it. You just nailed it right there. The difference between those two words.
Yes, yes. Now, just to wrap up, what modalities do you practice specific? It could be something like, I'm just throwing one out there, like maybe journaling, taking a walk. For me, it's meditation, that allows you to feel that you are applying a specific way to feel empowered or be empowered.
Yeah, definitely nature for me. To me, that's where I connect, mostly to myself and to something greater than myself. In the more day to day meditation, sure. And for anybody who's considering meditation, like, don't get yourself overwhelmed. You spend 5 minutes 3 times a week, 10 minutes sitting by yourself, closing your eyes, and just watching your breath, observing what's going on in your mind. What kind of thoughts are you having? What kind of emotions? What kind of bodily sensations? That alone is a type of meditation and will change your life. Even 10 minutes a day, 3 times a week. So don't create these overwhelming expectations. I'm going to do it every day for the rest of my life. That's great if you choose to do that, but start small. So don't set yourself up for failure. And so I use those practices and also breath work. Um, it's probably the single most important life changing practice that I've discovered. I can't remember if I said my father was a psychiatrist. My degree's in psychology. I was on a track to get a PhD. And when I discovered breath work 30 something years ago, I jumped tracks. I never went for the PhD because it works so profoundly and heals so at so many different levels so quickly. And that's a whole other conversation. We could do a whole hour about breath work because there's a big umbrella term. There's a lot of different modalities under that umbrella. But the type that talking about is it's you breathe in a certain way for about an hour and a half, and amazing stuff happens.
Yes, growing up in a very Hindu environment, pranayama, another way of expressing breath work,
Yes.
something I was exposed to. And ironically, given the fact that I was born and raised in the US for the most part, I took some of it. I hate admitting this, but I took some of it for granted. I started to dismiss some things as woohoo. And it wasn't until recently I got yoga certified. I got deeper and deeper into things, going back to my roots. And I'm like, oh, it's scientific. It's not just um, something that's already there from birth, and recognizing that you can have mastery over it to help you.
Yes.
Again, go
Yes.
empowerment, right?
Yes. And the other thing that I love when you're talking about the breath is that if we think about it, in most spiritual traditions, in most religions, and even in some secular languages in the world, the same word can mean breath or spirit, depending on how we use it. So that's, to me, the highest way that I relate to how the breath is so powerful and profoundly life changing.
I think of breath as power because it is energy that's moving through in and out. So it's all connected in terms of empowerment. Now,
Yes.
other aspect of my audience that is a large part of the theme of my podcast is storytelling for solopreneurs. And is there any message that you have that still resonates on a personal level, but also on a professional level for those who are like myself? They're solopreneurs and trying to, I don't want to say trying, but consciously building their own business.
Yeah. I mean, and I've been an entrepreneur for 30 something years myself. And again, it's not an easy path. And yet for me, I can't imagine doing it a different way. And that is the way that my soul's calling, if you would, my unfolded. um and I think probably this would be helpful, is to trust. When we're going back to the situation that we're living in as a species, you could say that we're in make it or break it time. The planet will be fine. As much as we care, life will continue. It might take several million years, but life will find homeostasis, will balance itself again. Consciousness will continue evolving. Maybe at the end, it's an enlightened cockroach planet. Who knows? Whether we make it, that's what's up. That's what we're beginning to wake up and open our eyes to. So when we look at it from that perspective, there's so much writing on any one of us saying yes to our soul level calling, and for anybody watching this who's feeling that call to step into a role of leadership, of conscious leadership, or as a healer, as a teacher, doing whatever it is that's going to impact the world. And by the way, I include art in that. To me, art and bringing beauty into this world is it's life changing and transformational. So I'm not limiting the definition of that. Is like we all get to express and define it however we want to. So anybody who is feeling that call, to answer that call to service, to making a difference, to teach, to heal, to be an activist for change in whatever way, it's like you can count on the support of the universe. The universe has a vested interest in you saying yes and stepping into your power and stepping into your purpose, like any one of us. And you can take that to the bank. Like, where are we going to place our trust? Right? Are we going to place our trust on a company whose doors could close any moment, as many have discovered because of the pandemic? Are we going to place our trust on an economic system that is completely made up? We used to say that it was paper. It's not even paper. It's ones and zeros up in a cloud somewhere. Is that what we're going to place our trust on? I'm not.
Absolutely. And you again resonate with me because I often have a prayer. Now, I slip. Sometimes I go into my dark places where I have to remind myself of this truth, but the fact that the universe has my back.
Yes. And that shifts everything, right? Like that's the shift from paranoia, waiting for the next shoe to drop and feeling done to by life, and having been, dealt an unfair set of cards by life. So that's a paranoid relationship to life versus pronoia. It's like even the stuff that feels difficult and challenging, there's always a silver lining, and some magic and wisdom and experience and growth and evolution can come out of any challenge.
Well, thank you so much, Christian. I can't wait to read your book. I can't wait to have you back. And one thing you had mentioned was there's a chapter in your book that speaks to even women in empowerment. Maybe we can go deeper on that when you come back.
I'd love to. I would love to.
Well, wonderful. Thank you so much. I hope you have a wonderful day.
Thank you so much, Shilpa. You the same, and thanks for having me on the show.
It was an honor. Thanks for tuning in, sweet soul. If you've enjoyed this episode, I would be so grateful for your kind review on Apple Podcast. Simply click on the link in the show notes to leave your lovely feedback and uplift our spirits. Your support means the world to me and helps our show thrive. So please show me your love and continue to practice Omni Mindfulness.